Patricia Gibson.
Forward and for the tone that she set at the beginning of this debate. I was first elected in 2015 and I have spoken out repeatedly about the damage that these assessments and the way they're carried out does to my constituents and constituents right across the United Kingdom. And although I'm glad to be speaking in this debate, I'm really annoyed that it's necessary, because it shouldn't be necessary. The Minister is not hearing anything today of which he is not aware. He knows exactly what's going on here, and it really isn't acceptable that we come back time after time to say the same things over and over again. Now, I know the Minister, and I'll save him the trouble perhaps, I know the Minister is going to tell us about changes that have been made. He's going to tell us about people who are not reassessed if they've got a severe disability or a lifelong illness. He's going to tell us that people with progressive conditions requiring high-level support will only be assessed every 10 years. But I'd say to the Minister, that's all very well and good, but it simply isn't good enough. The Disability Benefits Consortium, made up of 80 different charities and organisations, have stated that they did not think assessors had sufficient expertise to carry out assessments. Respondents who had seen a copy of their paperwork following assessment said it badly or very badly reflected the answers that they gave. And we all know this to be true when we speak to our constituents. We all know that the Citizens' Advice have told us that 81% of their advisers report inaccuracies in work capability assessments. So this information is out there, it's in our constituencies, it's in our surgeries, and I know it will be in the Minister's inbox as well. I have had constituents in a state of extreme distress tell me that they felt the questions they were being asked at these assessments were extremely intimate, invasive and inappropriate. Discussing very intimate details of your medical challenges with a panel of strangers, it has to be said, in a context that causes the claimant distress and nervousness, very often sets back the claimant's health, exacerbating their condition. And all of this, Mr Chair, all of this before they are told, often incorrectly, that they are fit for work, with the paperwork not accurately reflecting the answers the claimant gave at the assessment. 51% of ESA claimants are recorded as having a mental or behavioural disorder as their main disabling condition. And Rethink Mental Illness has published a report stating that assessments can be traumatising and anxiety-inducing in a system that requires claimants to collect their own medical evidence and inherently discriminates against people with mental illness. But very often at these assessments, a false sense of security is created where assessors will appear friendly and ask questions, supposedly by way of a preamble to the formal interview. Do you have pets? Do you have a dog? Do you walk it? What lovely weather we're having. Do you like to sit in the garden? All of these questions are asked as though they are a casual conversation, only for the claimant to subsequently discover, upon receiving his or her paperwork, that their assessment decision has been reached on the basis of answers to these so-called casual questions instead of the medical evidence presented. Mr Chair, I think that is sinister. I will indeed.
Thank you very much for making such an important point. I have a constituent who was asked if they could go into their bag and get a pen out. And they did, and then that was put down in the assessment, and she was in floods of tears at my surgery, saying she felt like she'd just been tricked. It's just awful. It's
a false sense that's presented to the people, some very vulnerable people, going to these assessments, and it's simply not good enough. The simple fact is, and the Minister knows this, that this system, a partnership with the private sector, which has been in place since 2008, brought in, I have to say, under Labour, opened the gates. But the Minister has to understand that this has opened the gates to a place where folk who are sick and disabled are commodified. And it's not working. Nearly half of women involved in work capability benefit tests have attempted suicide. We have seen the reports of claimants being asked, why haven't you killed yourself? And even a double amputee being told he was no longer eligible for the mobility aspect of his disability living allowance. And sadly, these stories continue to emerge, and we've heard today about the very sad case of Stephen Smith, with which I'm sure the Minister is familiar. I have heard ministers say, I can't remember if it's the Minister sitting here today, but I've heard other ministers from the DWP department say that the number of successful appeals against decisions shows that the system is working. Mr Chair, I must confess I've never heard such stuff and nonsense. The number of successful appeals shows that too many incorrect decisions are made which deny the most vulnerable in society, the sick and the infirm, the support they need and the support they deserve. That is why the Scottish Government is committed to taking the lead on obtaining medical evidence so that claimants are not burdened by this. That's why there will be no private sector involvement in assessments, so that there's no profit motive for them to declare claimants fit for work when they are not in a payment by results system. That's why the Scottish Government says that claimants will be offered a location and time and date that suits them for assessment, with home visits for those with travel difficulties. And that is why they've said audio recordings of assessments will be a standard to ensure accuracy and transparency. And I urge the Minister, I urge this Government to step up and admit that the current system punishes those who are unfit to work, those who are sick, and cruelly strips them of their dignity. And I hope the Minister will admit that it doesn't work. And I urge him to look at the measures that the Scottish Government will implement and take a leaf out of that particular book. The current system doesn't work for my constituents in North Ayrshire and Arran, and it doesn't work for anyone's constituents. And I ask the Minister to do the right thing. I ask him to reach out a compassionate hand to those living with a disability. Anyone who is a Minister for Disabled People should do no less.